Imagine the teenage King Edward VI, Henry VIII's only legitimate son, standing in his private chambers, plucking the feathers from his pet falcon before tearing it into 4 pieces, and then saying that he was that falcon whom everyone plucked, but that soon he would pluck them and tear them apart. It's a shocking image, but did it really happen? I'm historian and author Claire Ridgway, and today I'm investigating one of the strangest and most disturbing stories about King Edward VI, a story that comes from a foreign diplomat's report and that may just possibly reveal how England's boy king saw his power, his enemies, and himself. I just want to say a big thank you to channel member Elizabeth and her son Joseph for actually asking this question. The story comes from Simon Renard, the imperial ambassador to England, who reported it to Emperor Charles V in March 1551. Renard didn't witness the event himself. He said he'd heard it through reliable channels at court. Here's how he put it. He is said to have plucked a falcon which he kept in his private chamber and tore it into 4 pieces, saying as he did so to his governors that he likened himself to the falcon whom everyone plucked, but that he would pluck them too thereafter and tear them in 4 parts. Renard added that his sources had verified it, though the English ambassador Sir John Mason denied the story and accused the French diplomat Jean de Montluc of inventing it entirely. So we have one of those fascinating Tudor rumours, one side saying it's a fact, the other dismissing it as court gossip. But even if the event never literally happened, why did people believe it could have? What was happening at court in 1551 that could make such a story sound plausible? So let's rewind to March 1551, when King Edward VI was just 13 years old, but already 4 years into his reign. He'd been king since he was 9, with his uncle Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, ruling as Lord Protector, followed by John Dudley, Earl of Warwick. And Edward was no passive child king. He was devoutly Protestant, passionate, uncompromising, and convinced of his divine duty to reform religion in England. This story about the falcon seems to come from a period of real frustration for him, particularly over the issue of his half-sister, the Lady Mary, the future Mary I. Mary, of course, was a committed Catholic, and Edward had forbidden her from hearing Mass, in line with his reforms and legislation. Her cousin, Emperor Charles V, was furious with the king. Ambassador Richard Morrison recorded that Charles demanded that the King's Council should confirm a promise allegedly made years earlier that Mary would be allowed to keep her Mass, even if others could not. Sir William Paget denied any such promise, and the Emperor's response was fiery. Edward himself recorded in his journal that the ambassador brought a short message of war, and the Emperor threatened military action if Mary was not allowed to worship as she pleased. That was a terrifying prospect for a country that really couldn't afford another war. Edward's councillors panicked. They summoned Archbishop Cranmer and Bishop Nicholas Ridley, urging them to persuade the king to give way. The bishops argued that even Old Testament kings had tolerated hill altars, but were still good kings, a poetic way of saying sometimes it's wise to compromise. But Edward, barely in his teens, refused to bend. He argued scripture back at them, firing, as one historian, Beth Quitsland, puts it, a fusillade of scriptural history. He told them that God had protected King David and he would protect him too. He that preserved David will preserve me from taking harm for his cause. In his journal, Edward wrote, "The bishops of Canterbury, London, Rochester did conclude to give licence to sin was sin, to suffer and wink at it for a time might be borne, so all haste possible might be used." Now, the meaning of this is debated. Were they allowing Mary's private mass for a short time or calling for it to end quickly? Either way, Edward saw it as weakness. He wasn't happy. When the council pressed him harder, warning him of the imminent perils of his realm, the boy king burst into tears, tears of anger and frustration. Contemporaries wrote that the council members were moved to tears themselves, amazed to see such conviction in one so young. Soon after this confrontation, Edward's journal records that in the same month that he'd had this argument with his council, he had several people imprisoned for hearing Mass in Mary's household, including Sir Anthony Browne and Mr. Morgan, a sergeant of the law. Even his own uncle, Sir Clement Smith, husband of Dorothy Seymour, was reprimanded. The Emperor did not declare war in the end. He was far too busy elsewhere. But Edward had stood firm and perhaps felt both proud and resentful of those who tried to overrule him. And this is where the Falcon story may come in. If the tale has any truth, the symbolism is powerful. Edward may have felt plucked, undermined, controlled, and stripped of his authority by the very men meant to serve him. By destroying the Falcon, he was sending a message. I am king. I can not only pluck you, I can tear you apart. It's the kind of symbolic gesture that a frustrated, intelligent, strong-willed teenager might indeed make. But did Edward VI really pluck and tear apart his Falcon? Well, we can't say for certain. Renard swore his sources were reliable, but Sir John Mason dismissed it as gossip. It's possible the story was simply diplomatic propaganda, an attempt to paint Edward as cruel or unstable. But whether literal or metaphorical, the story fits the mood of Edward's reign in 1551. A young king determined to assert himself against powerful councillors and a defiant sister who was ignoring his orders. True or not, the Falcon story captures something real about Edward VI. I think he had the mind of a theologian and the will of a ruler far beyond his years. And I think it's a shame that we don't get to see him ruling in his majority. He's so often overshadowed by his father's legend and his sister Elizabeth's brilliance. But Edward's conviction and self-belief did leave a mark. So what do you think? Was Edward's Falcon moment a dramatic symbol of power, or was it just gossip, a tale that flew out of control? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring these fascinating corners of Tudor history, please do like, subscribe and ring that little bell so you don't miss future episodes. And for even more Tudor history, do consider joining my channel as a member on YouTube. Thank you. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.